Hi, good morning. So I am in a waiting period. I'm in a bit of a limbo phase because our family has actually plans to eventually move from the Netherlands to Germany. But this depends actually on schools because we want to send our children to a Waldorf school there and they're quite full. But I figured instead of just sitting here in limbo doing nothing and checking my email again and again, I can do something that could prove to be maybe useful for others. So I decided to write a post, so I will also post the text about language learning because obviously we have to learn again a new language, or in my case relearn. So this is going to be a post about learning a language as an adult. I've got my notes here, so I will be looking through, making sure I don't forget anything. First things first, why would you learn the language of the country you live in? Well, there are many reasons. For me, the most important is, cat next to the camera. Okay. The better understanding of the culture. For me, before I learned Dutch, I really thought that the Dutch are actually very rude, because there are things that actually exist in English, which is a very polite language anyway, or exist in Greek, but don't in Dutch. So one thing that I kept noticing was that I would say to someone thank you in English and they would reply yes instead of please. Like it was very common that I would say thank you and people would say yes in English, but actually when I started talking Dutch and they said dank u wel or dank je wel, they would say alsjeblieft or alsjeblieft, which is the equivalent of you're well. That's not very handy though. Can you please go away? So you can understand the language better, and the Dutch, of course, they are still a very direct nation, but they're not as rude as they came across to be when I was speaking English with them. Then of course your daily life becomes easier, and we are talking about bureaucracy, filling papers, talking with the tax office, these kind of things. When you can do them in the language of the country, it is much easier and you can avoid all sorts of misunderstandings. Better communication with the school if you have children. You can talk with the teachers, understand what they are saying, follow all the WhatsApp groups of the parents without having to translate every little thing. Better understanding your child's social life. So when your child is playing with friends at home, you can understand a bit, what are they talking about, and okay, is this a swear word? How heavy is it? Is it appropriate for their age? Like these kind of things. You can better integrate if this is what you wish to do. I know that there are many people, many of the people watching this might be expats and are thinking, I will live in this country just for 2 years and then go away. Why learn a language, especially if it's not widely used, like Dutch, for example. But if you do want to integrate or to really understand the culture, then learning the language is kind of a must, I think. Easier connection with the locals, what I said about culture, but also about building your village. Like we don't have family here, but thanks to us speaking Dutch, I have a really good relationship with the parents at school. And you can see that they are much more open to getting to know me and my story and how I ended up living here. And many of them have become friends, or, people that I know will help me in times of need as I would help them. And that's much easier to do if you speak the language of the person, And then last but not least, of course, your chances to get employed are much higher if you speak the language. And you can notice, at least all over Europe, you have more and more conservative tendencies. So there are more and more refugees, and this makes people more and more scared and conservative because we are highly uneducated. And one thing that people employ, that employers employ, they use in order to keep their companies without people coming from abroad is just putting out applications only in the native language. Something I noticed even 10 years ago. I would go on a website looking for vacancies. If I put the page in English, maybe you had 0 vacancies, and the moment I put the page in Dutch, there were actually vacancies. And we are not talking about secretarial roles where language is very important. We are talking about all sorts of roles. So it is a thing. It's very unfortunate. It's very sad, but it is also how it is. So. Now, how could you go about learning a language? There are many ways, of course, but we could separate them in 2 major categories. The one is to learn the traditional way by learning the grammar, the syntax, vocabulary lists, memorizing, this kind of thing. And the other is through immersion, and this is the natural way, let's say, it's the way that children learn. So how children learn their mother tongue is they listen to the people around them, they watch intently, they take notes in their head without, like subconsciously, without realizing, and after listening for hours and hours and hours, they start talking, they start babbling, they start using one or two words, complementing them with movements of their arms and expressions of their face, and finally they start to speak. So around 1 year of age, you can see that kids understand a lot, like toddlers understand a lot, but only when they arrive at around 2 years of age can they actually speak. We are talking about a whole year, and of course, for children this also means like the huge evolution of their brain, huge parts of brain development, but it gives you an idea of how long it can take from understanding to actually talking, and to talking fluently. That's yet another level, of course. So which method would suit you? This is different for everyone, and it depends also on your language level. So do you start from scratch? Are you learning a European language, or are you learning a language that has a completely different system of writing, like Japanese or Chinese? For us Europeans, it seems very inaccessible, but of course you can learn it. Of course there are ways. So it highly depends on what your language goal is. And on your level, like if you start from zero, or if you're a complete beginner or advanced intermediate, you know. So how it was for us when we decided it was time to learn Dutch, we started with the traditional method. We found a teacher and we did grammar and syntax and these kind of things. It didn't really work out, but it didn't work out because we had zero immersion. We did live in the Netherlands, but we lived at Delft. Our master studies were in English. All that students spoke perfect English. We are talking about like highly educated students who would immediately switch the moment they heard accent, they would switch to English. Many of them spoke even English between them while they were at campus. So it was impossible to basically have an immersion. And then once I overcame the shame, because there was also a lot of shame of speaking Dutch. You know, when you try to speak Dutch and the other person switches in English, the first thought that comes to mind is not they're trying to be helpful, but it is, oh, you know, my Dutch is so bad, they don't understand. So immersion is actually what really helps. And this is why refugees who are actually uprooted and forced to live in a different country, they learn the languages so fast, because their survival and hopefully even their thriving later on really depends on that, depends on language. So they watch, their antennas are really focused on the language, and to learn and to listen, and, you know, as fast as they can. And this is actually why when you have like bubbles of refugees or immigrants, they become fluent much slower or never. You do have this phenomenon of, you know, you had many Greek immigrants in the 50s and 60s who went to the US or Australia or Germany, and they kept just talking Greek with each other, and they used the minimal German in order to do their everyday business. And they were much later to learn or to integrate. You have it as well with the Chinatowns, or, you know, even people with the different religion. You have it a lot with Turkish or Moroccan groups who feel much more comfortable in their own bubble. And that is very much understandable, especially if you don't feel accepted by the culture or by the people of the country where you end up living in. So it is understandable, but it really does not help you in becoming fluent. And it's a vicious circle, because if you don't speak the language, then the locals see you. They think that you're not willing to be part of the country and integrate, and there is even more like this hate racism circle that feeds itself in a way. Now, why is it so hard for many adults to learn the new language? The thing is, it is not hard if you do it by choice. It is not hard if you do it as a hobby. It is not hard if you do it from the comfort of your own home and you think, oh, I'd like to learn a language. It becomes hard when it becomes a necessity, when it is not really a free choice, but when it is, you know, I'm going to live in Germany, I want to understand what the teachers say about my children at school, I need to learn the language. Needing to learn the language is very different from wanting to learn it. So that's the hard reality, the hard truth, that if you actually are forced to learn a language, you don't have the same passion as if you learn it out of a deep wish. Like, you have so many young kids who want to learn like Japanese, Chinese, because like, or, you know, Korean, like you have all this movement of the Korean pop, which I have no clue what it is, but it is a thing. You have children interested in these Asian languages because of the manga comics, for example. But it's a passion, you know, they want to learn it, they want it so much, they are going to learn all these thousands of characters. So that is the thing. And the other issue is our ego getting in the way. Like, children don't mind making mistakes, they're completely fine with it, but we as adults have a very strong ego, and we don't want to feel stupid. You know, for me, when we first moved to the Netherlands, I was very young, and I wanted to be to appear smart and charming. I didn't want to appear as like a stuttering imbecile. So speaking English was the easy way for me, because I could express myself in English fluently and be who I am. While in Dutch, I was a very simplified, stupid version of myself, which I didn't really like. But how did I eventually learn Dutch? I came across a quote that really helped me, and that was that actually having an accent is a sign of courage. And it damn right is, because it means you're trying to learn something new, something you're not already perfect at. So having an accent means you are trying to speak the other language, and you still have your accent because you're not perfect at it, but you're courageous enough to try and do it. So it did help me a lot. And there were 2 points that were really key points. The one was when we decided to stay here and have a family, and I knew I would have a child, and I said to myself, no, I want to know what the teachers are saying at school. I want to be able to understand what my child is doing at school. I want to be able to help her if she has difficulties later on. So that's when I hired a private teacher, and I had lessons in the evenings while the baby was asleep. And the guy really helped me. And he helped me because he was very matter of... I can hear the cat flap. Is the cat in or out? I'll go check, I'm coming back. Yeah, so I was talking about the 2 breakthroughs, right? Communication, that's the thing that for me, the great breakthrough is the fact that I really I realized I really wanted to communicate, and I wanted to communicate in Dutch so that people feel comfortable talking with me, explaining things to me, giving me insights about how Dutch society and culture works. So these 2 things. And also another tip that's not, it's not in my notes, but it really helped me when I joined playgroups when my youngest was about 1 year old, and you had there many refugees who didn't speak any English. So that was the first time that I actually thought, okay, you know, these women also don't speak Dutch, they're also trying to learn, and we don't have another common language to communicate in. So that's when I started making the first baby steps, but I got stuck in this like very beginner level for quite a long time before I started the lessons and before actually moving to Hillegom. And so that was with my Dutch. And of course, the moment I had a level that allowed me to start reading literature in Dutch, I started doing it immediately. And even though I couldn't understand everything, as long as I could follow the gist, like the plot line, the story, I kept reading and reading and reading books in Dutch. And I didn't start with heavy literature. I started with feel-good books, like, you know, The Rosie Project or the Rosie Effect. How is it the English title? I'm not sure. Anyway, books that are like feel-good in a way. And also Dutch books, by Dutch authors. And one issue about Dutch is because it's a language that is not spoken by so many people, you don't have a lot of material. So we did watch with Nikos also Netflix series in Dutch. And yes, we could not choose the quality of them because there are not so many out there, but it did help us a lot to listen better and also to have like a more broad vocabulary. So how do I relearn my German? Full disclosure, my paternal grandmother was German, and we did visit Germany as children to visit her family. She has a very big family. And she did spoke German to me when I was young, until maybe 4 or 5 years, until my younger brother rebelled and he said, we are in Greece, we should speak Greek. It was not a good idea. But anyhow, I also had German at school, and I did get my Mittelstufe, which basically translates into a B1, B2 level. So I could speak quite good German. I could write essays about complicated topics like capitalism or human rights or war, these kind of things, and talk about them as well. But after 13 years of Dutch, actually the only thing I had left was the German sentence structure, which is what my Dutch tutor noticed right on. He was like, wait a minute, do you speak German? I'm like, yeah, I did. Yeah, because all your syntax is in German. Well, in Dutch is a bit different. But yeah, when my German aunt calls me for my birthday or for Christmas, I end up speaking slow Dutch to her, and I'm throwing in there tschüss, hallöchen, auf Wiederhören, so just words in German. But I do have the accent. The German accent is not difficult for me. I mean, what accent would be difficult after learning the Dutch one? That's a hard one. And I did have the vocabulary hidden, like buried somewhere in my brain. So what I did the moment we decided we want to move in Germany eventually, be it in 3 months or in a year, I got some books that are specifically made to help adults learn the language. And this is actually let me check that I say it right, the story learning books by Ollie Richards. Who has a whole method for adults, and it is based on immersion, and it is based on learning through stories and through storytelling, which is really my thing. I was introduced to the Richards method by my husband, who learns languages as a hobby as well. Did I listen to him while he was talking about Richards? Not really. But actually yes, because now that I needed him, I knew where to find him. So I got the books. I was very pleasantly surprised to realize that I can very easily read the A2, B1 level books, so I'm ready to move on to the B2. While Nikos, who never had such a high level of German, he actually began by watching a channel that is called Natürlich German, and it is through storytelling again, but then there is this lovely woman who is reading stories, or not reading, but just also talking about things, like explaining things. Like he has the whole Norse mythology, and she tells the stories in simple German, and she starts from a zero beginner and she goes up to advanced level. I've also watched a few of her videos, and that's really great material, and it is again based on immersion and into having comprehensible input. So the thing is, you want to have input that you can understand enough to follow the story, even though you will have a lot of words or expressions you don't understand, but still you can follow. So this is how he's learning, but there is a difference in personality types, right? I mean, Nikos is more of an introvert, so for him language is more about understanding and being able to consume content about topics he's interested in. Like obviously Germans have a lot of culture and music and history, these kind of things. I saw you laughing with the history part. But you know, he really loves Mozart, for example, and there are operas written in German and these kind of things. It is nice for him and important to be able to read the material in the language it was actually written. While for me, while I am an introvert in the sense that I need time on my own to recharge, I'm also quite extroverted and I get a lot of energy from communicating, and this means sharing my own ideas and also listening to the ideas of others, like getting into dialogue. Okay, now our other cat is going to cat bomb me. Okay, could you, yes, thank you. So yeah, it depends also on your personality. See what is more important for you and find this sort of material. For example, Nikos, he's now doing courses in German, and what he does is he is trying to do it with immersion and with a comprehensible input. So he's asking the tutor to speak in German, and he will reply in English that he's comfortable with, because he's focusing on listening and understanding. While for me, forcing myself to talk and produce speech and express myself in German is not overwhelming, but it is actually pushing me enough to learn. So it depends what is the best way for you to learn, but I think still, even if you're an introvert and you enjoy input, at some point you will have to get into output, to produce output, to fight your perfectionism and to fight your ego, because that's the only way to get to start speaking and talking. And remember, really an accent is a sign of courage, so just dare to do it. And last but not least, a note on kids. So what are we planning to do with our kids? When my middle daughter was born, my oldest was 3 years old, and she would not let me put the youngest to sleep. We had zero help here, so at some point I said, look, I will let you watch something for half an hour. It was the first time actually she watched something on the screen when she was 3, but it will be in English, because we figured if we're going to give screen, she might as well learn something from it. And lo and behold, 1 year later, after watching half an hour of Peppa Pig in English, we realized she could speak English with a British accent, and it was wonderful. And she didn't get addicted on screens or anything. After her sister was a bit older, we could cut back screen to only weekends, and that's how it used to be until recently, that we started to let them watch every day half an hour of German, even 1 hour sometimes for the older ones, not for the youngest. And the thing is, German and Dutch, they are very, very similar. They can really follow the stories in German because they also have the visual cues, of course, of the illustrations of the cartoons they're watching. But I know it will be a shock to them to realize that speaking German is not the same as understanding a story in German. So when we know the date of moving, when we are closer to moving, we will try and find someone to play with them in German, because actually kids learn so much better through play. They are relaxed, they are happy, they have positive, they have endorphins, like good hormones circulating in their body, and they just take in language much better than being under stress in a very strict learning environment. So this is our plan. I hope the tips were helpful. Please do share if you have any golden tips on learning a language as an adult, especially a language that you didn't choose to learn, but life brought you to have to learn, to need to learn. If you have other types of struggles, like what do you do, especially, I have a friend, she's dyslexic, so learning languages is anyway a tad harder for her. I have another friend who just has, in general, like a great difficulty with the languages, and she has said, look, I've chosen not to spend my energy there because I need to divide my energy and I don't have enough for everything. So that's also okay, but how do you go about, not understanding what your environment says? So how is it to live in a country where you don't speak the language? I'm really interested to know. Now, I hope it was helpful. Have a nice day, and we talk again soon. Bye.